Hello, this is Power in the Word, and I'm Scott Reed. Thanks for joining me for this particular study session in our Book of Mormon. Come follow me. Today's lesson is Mosiah 7 through 10. And we get a little bit of storyline, a couple of good things to talk about. But we're going to jump back and find out what's happened with a group that left a couple of weeks ago. So, jumping into our scriptures, notice verse 1. You're going to have this footnote right here, 1a, that you need to be sure to underline. In 1a, it sends you back to Mosiah 1, verse 27, where we had a group of people leave Zarahemla and go down to see what's happening in the original land of Lehi Nephi. So in your heading, you may want to be sure that you put Ammon here is going to find them. And King Limhi is the king at this time, though he lives in Lamanite territory and is in bondage to them. So with that, let's look at verse 1. Mosiah sends this group down to the land of Lehi Nephi, the original land where they had lived in the Promised Land. And so this group leaves Zarahemla. There are 16 strong men that desired to do this. One of them is Ammon. So here's Ammon. He being a strong and mighty man, he's a descendant of Zarahemla. That's going to play an important part. And he was their leader. Now here's some good types and shadows of Ammon and how he is a Christ figure. Always looking in our scriptures for Jesus Christ. That's what we're there. And remember that if it's before Christ, which this is 121 BC in your heading, then we have to look for types and shadows or similitudes of him through these events and these people. So here's some good types and shadows you might want to write down and make note of. Well, this little group wanders in the wilderness for 40 days. That should sound familiar here in verse 4. 40 in scriptures is a number that represents a period of trial or testing, probation or mourning. In Noah's time, remember it rained for 40 days. In Christ's time, he fasted for 40 days. These and other biblical parallels create a typology of deliverance following a 4-day tribulation. So it rains for 40 days and then Noah's delivered. And Christ fasts and then there's a deliverance from that. So we're going to pick that up and repeat that here with Ammon, who arrives to find Limhi and his people in despair, and he will provide hope and rescue and deliverance. So good number here that you might want to underline in verse 4. Jumping down to verse 6, Ammon takes 3 of his brethren. Their names are Amaleki, Helam, and Hem, and they go into the land of Nephi. And instantly the king there takes them, verse 7, he binds them and commits them to prison. And after 2 days, note verse 8, they are brought to stand before the king and were permitted, or rather commanded, that they should answer the questions which he has for them. King Limhi says, hey, I'm king. I'm Limhi. I'm the son of Noah, who was the son of Zenoth, who was the original one who came with his group in Omni out of the land of Zarahemla to see what had happened to our land here. Ammon notes, he says, wait, I'm Ammon. I'm a descendant of Zarahemla, and have come out of the land of Zarahemla in verse 13 to inquire concerning what had happened to Zeniff and that little group. And Limhi then says, whoa, now I know that you're not a spy or a Lamanite because you've come from Zarahemla. I know of a surety now. We here in the land of Nephi are in bondage to the Lamanites. And you may want to start a thread of underlining every time you see the word bondage. It is the main theme of today's lesson. So we'll address that, but here's where that word begins. So I've underlined in my scriptures, whenever I find a word of repetition or a theme, I always underline them in brown. So here's my word bondage twice in 15. And then Limhi reviews for Ammon and his brethren why they have been placed in bondage. You may want to be sure that you get these three reasons. Limhi discloses the three reasons as: 1, because of our iniquities and abominations. So down here in verse 20, 24, and 25, we're going to look at that. Okay. 2nd, the leader originally of this little group, Zeniff, was overzealous, okay? Meaning he went beyond what was necessary to inherit the land of his fathers. He was an overzealous person. And we'll see that word pop up a couple of times. And last of all, we killed a prophet of the Lord. His name is Abinadi. And so we'll look at that. But those are the three reasons Limhi discloses why they have been placed in bondage. Verse 17, now it came to pass on the morrow that King Limhi sent a proclamation out to all of his people and say, I want you to gather to the temple. Now, once again, here is this established pattern of teaching at the temple. We're going to see it even expanded as we teach in the temple, and then we send you home to learn and talk about what you have experienced there at the temple. So be sure that you get this. This is where the main thrust of that pattern is. It is established by the Savior when he appears in 3 Nephi chapter 11, and he will teach at the temple and then send them home in 17. So be sure you catch that pattern. Notice then, here is in verse 20, we mentioned it. It is because of our iniquities and abominations that he has brought us into bondage. Okay, there's the first reason. The second reason was Zeniff, our leader. He was overzealous in 21. And because of the craftiness of King Laman, of the Lamanites, who deceived by cunning and craftiness and placed King Zeniff and his people into bondage. And then, verse 22, be sure you get this here. They were placed in bondage. Okay. There is an interesting note here in 22, maybe we should mention before we move on. Notice the king had set a tribute, or you would say a tax, upon the Nephites there to pay the Lamanites. It consisted of this word right here, barley. Now that's an interesting word. It appears again in Mosiah 9:9 and then a couple of times in Alma. There has been criticism against the Book of Mormon because they actually argue that barley is not in the Americas. And so to have the Book of Mormon mention barley would be a evidence that it's not true. However, note, there are actually 3 types of wild barley native to the Americas, something scientists have been aware of for a long time. Over time, more and more evidence for this little barley, that's what they actually call it, its name in the Americas, has emerged over an increasing wider span, and both time and geography have brought evidence of it. So there is native barley in Americas. So interesting little note there that science has and the evidences in the Americas have brought to pass. So be sure you underline that word barley there. Okay, back to our scriptures. Notice the third reason, as was mentioned, is that they had killed a prophet of God. I would be sure that you put some color in your scriptures on this particularly. 26a is a very important footnote. You come down here and it's going to tell you to go forward to Mosiah 7:20. This Mosiah 7 is going to be part of a flashback that we get to see what actually happens and who this prophet is. You know him as Abinadi. So note, here is Abinadi, a prophet of the Lord, that they had killed, a chosen man of God, who told them of their wickedness and abomination and prophesied of many things which are to come, yea, even the coming of Christ. Note, as mentioned, here is Mosiah 15, okay, and a reference to that, and an important reference in Doctrine and Covenants 136 that talks to us about the importance of prophets to this world, and to then kill a prophet of God is a sin of huge. In fact, notice I can't say it better than George Q. Cannon, Elder George Q. Cannon. He said, "There is no sin that a nation can commit which the Lord avenges so speedily and fearfully as he does the shedding of innocent blood, or in other words, the killing of his anointed and authorized servants. No nation which has been guilty of this dreadful crime has ever escaped his vengeance. The thunderbolts of his wrath have been always launched forth for the destruction of the perpetrators of such wickedness. It is a rank offense." See, there he places it way up here. Okay? It is a rank offense against the majesty of heaven and the authority of the Creator, which he never suffers to pass unrebuked. For such men act in his stead and are his representatives on the earth. So Elder Cannon would say this sin it ranks as a high offense against heaven. Now, you also may want to note that it is here that we'll get more explanation, but it's here for the reasons why they killed Abinadi. Okay? There's 5 things that they list, Limhi here, of why he actually was killed. It is a telltale sign. So look at this. Notice, it's Abinadi who said to them, 1, Christ was the God, the Father of all things. Now, we're going to see a much more elaborated doctrine of that when we get to Mosiah 15 next week. But Christ is God the Father in many ways, okay? And he also teaches that Christ should take upon him the image of man, that a God would come down to condescend and become like you and I, mortal man. And that number 3, it should be in this same image after which man was created in the beginnings. Man was created in the image of God. Literally, the Bible teaches it. The Book of Mormon teaches it. It is clear that we literally are the children of God and are in him and mother's image. And note, in other words, he said that a man was created after the image of God. And number 4, that God should come down among the children of men. He would leave his heavenly throne and descend to come here and take upon him 5, a body of flesh and blood. Now, that's quite explicit teaching. Notice, Limhi says, and because he said this, those 5 items, which were the announcement of the true nature and characteristic of God, they put him to death. What a novel idea, friends, that somebody would teach such doctrine. Oh, wait, that's what Joseph Smith was persecuted and ultimately killed for as well, when he announced the true nature of God. Wait, that's also what modern day prophets have taken up and have declared in their proclamation of the living Christ, which has been issued in our day. Isn't that interesting? That it's the true nature and characteristics of God that upset the world so much that they would persecute us for correct doctrine and not being set on the creeds of men that have come through the dark ages. So note he adds, therefore, in verse 28, who wondereth that they are in bondage, underline it, and that they are smitten with sore afflictions. No wonder the Lord has not been with us, and we now are slaves to the Lamanites. And then he gives this quote in 29, 30, and 31. Note, this quotation is not directly given from any other known text, and it must have come off of the brass plates. So he ends this chapter then, and we move forward to the next one, where we see Ammon then takes some time to say, wait, King Limhi and your people, while we've got you here, okay, in the temple setting, let me rehearse to you, verse 3, the last words which King Benjamin taught us. And he explains to the people so that they might understand all the words. Now, that's fascinating why he rehearses then to this group of people. It's almost, as we talked about in Mosiah chapter 2 this evidence that Benjamin's speech has become a type of a constitutional document in Nephite culture. So if you need help with that, go back and watch that Mosiah 1 through 3 podcast there. Verse 4, it came to pass that after he had done this, that King Limhi dismisses the multitude, and yep, they are to go home, talk about what's happened, and they do. And as soon as Ammon then had read the record, the king inquired of him and says, wait, now that we've taken care of all of this, can you interpret languages, Ammon? So be sure that you underline this. Okay? And Ammon says, I can't, but I know of somebody who can. And he says, the king says to Ammon, being grieved for the affliction of my people, I had some concerns of being in bondage, so I sent 43 of my people into the wilderness to try to come find you guys in the land of Zarahemla and to come down and rescue us from this bondage. There it is again, verse 7. Be sure to underline it. And they were gone for the space of many days. And they, would you be sure you underline this? They found not the land of Zarahemla. Wait a minute. Zarahemla is the capital. How do you miss the capital of the people? Well, let me tell you a little bit of an experience that I had. As many of you know, I did Book of Mormon tours for BYU as a tour director down in Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Copan area. And I decided, as I remembered this story, I decided to try something. So at Tikal, while we were moving from one temple through this jungle into to find one of the next temples we were going to look at, and as we traveled here, I stopped one of my dear friends and I said, hey, would you just stay right here? Look at your watch. After 30 seconds, okay, I want you to listen intently and see if you can hear what I'm saying. So for 30 seconds, I said, go, and I walked for 30 seconds in this dense jungle full of wildlife. And I turned around after 30 seconds, and I have a very, very loud whistle. As a dad, I was determined to be able to get the attention of my 7 children. And so I developed a very, very loud whistle, which when they heard it was like, oh, that's my dad. Let's go. And they got well trained on that. It was fun how that has trickled down into my children and their children. So I whistled as loud as I could for several seconds. And then I went back and I turned to my friend and I said, could you hear me? And he said, hear you what? We couldn't hear a thing. In the jungles of Central America, the wildlife between the holler monkeys and the insects, the acacia, are so loud. I remember my wife having a video camera, and the mic is right here, so you can talk onto your video. Well, you can barely hear her talking, that the insects are so loud. So it's interesting because of this personal experience that I had and that I tried. Is it possible that those 43 men were maybe even feet or yards away from the capital and yet missed it? I just think this is a great evidence of the proof of the Book of Mormon and the experience that these 43 men had. It's interesting that they, missing the capital then, with all of their temples and all the people, they returned to the land having discovered, notice verse 8, they having discovered a land of many waters that were covered with bones of men and of beasts. There's a footnote right there in 8b that you might want to be sure to hit. 8b sends you back to Omni and that story, okay, that they went and found a land of bones, it says. And so these 43 men return, having not found Zarahemla, but they did find some plates. So verse 9, they brought back 24 plates engraven on pure gold. Now, you can see why the king is interested to see if Ammon can interpret languages. He would like to know what these plates have said. And having failed to find Zarahemla and still be in bondage and not being able then to deliver themselves, grateful for Ammon showing up. Just a note here that I love to ask as I teach this. Have there been times in your life when, despite your best efforts, everything seems to go wrong? Is it possible that the Lord had a different direction in mind for you, or other lessons He wanted you to learn for what that would bless your life or the lives of others more than what you had in mind would do? And I think sometimes maybe these 43 returned home thinking that they had failed to accomplish their mission, couldn't find Zarahemla. But is it possible that the Lord had a very different mission in mind, finding the 24 Jaredite records, and in that they were very successful? And what we owe these 43 men for going out and finding. So having found this, they found they're interested, about somebody that can translate this record. I'm very desirous because I would like to know why all these bones and swords and animals and so forth are dead, and yet I can't translate it. So verse 12, underline, I am desirous to know the cause of their destruction. Now you may want to make a note here, because of the 24 Jaredite plates, which will be interpreted. Ether 8:20 through 23 does record why the Jaredites were destroyed. It declares that it was because of secret combinations. So a good note and a warning for other civilizations not to be involved in secret combinations. Now Ammon says to the king, I can surely tell thee, O king, of a man that can translate the records. that he has wherewith that he can look and translate all records that are of ancient date, for it is a gift from God. And the things are called interpreters. Okay? We know them as a Urim and a Thummim. And no man can look in these interpreters or these stones unless he's commanded by God, or he will perish. And whosoever is commanded to look in them, well, we call them a seer. Okay, let's talk about that, and I would be sure that you underline verse 13. Seer is an interesting word in Hebrew. Here's the Hebrew word. It means to see, gaze, or to view. The interpreters, or we would call them seer stones, the Urim and the Thummim, Urim being a Hebrew for lights, Thummim is a Hebrew word for perfections, or that through these stones you might obtain perfect light. Now, a little bit about, before we get too far into seership, let's talk about what on earth is Mosiah doing with interpreters. Did Nephi bring stones? Doesn't say so. Okay, so where does he get a Urim and a Thummim? Well, we have a couple of hints. One out of the book of Ether. Remember, the brother of Jared, or Mahonri Moriankamer, actually was given 2 stones, a Urim and a Thummim, so that he might put with his record that he had of all things, or you know it as the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon. So the Jaredites had a Urim and Thummim, and in Doctrine and Covenants 17:1, you'll want to put that cross-reference there for sure. Okay, I can't get it well. Nope, not going to do it. Right here, Doctrine and Covenants 17:1, it does state that the Urim and Thummim that Joseph Smith actually had was the ones that the brother of Jared had. So he had the Jaredite pair of interpreters. If you want to see a picture of a real seer stone, Joseph Smith actually found a seer stone himself that he will use in his lifetime. You can go to the Ensign, October 2015, under Joseph the Seer, which will talk about and show you Joseph's personal seer stone, which the brethren still have today. So that's a little bit about seership, and we're forced to ask ourselves then, how did Mosiah get some seer stones? Well, this by Elder George Reynolds of the 12, some years back, wrote, Coriantumr, remember Coriantumr was a Jaredite who lived with the Mulekites in Zarahemla for 9 months, according to the book of Omni, and he was the head of the government of the Jaredite nation and may have had charge of the interpreters, and when found by the Mulekites, brought them to Zarahemla, where they were later given to Mosiah the first, the father of King Benjamin. That makes sense. Okay, so there's that little note if you want to be sure to put that in your scriptures. That's the only one I've ever been able to find on why Mosiah might have interpreters that actually make sense. So here is the 5 things about seership, of having seer stones. In verses 13 through 17, And I would be sure that you underline each of these key factors. Seers must be commanded to gaze or to look into seer stones, or they will perish. Second of all, a seer is greater than a prophet, right there in verse 15. Be sure you underline that. A seer is also a revelator and a prophet. A seership is of the greatest of all the gifts of God, and seers can know of secret things, or words, past, present, and future. So let's look a little bit about this. I've read you this before, where Boyd K. Packer made a latter-day comment as a prophet, seer, and revelator when he said, in the last period of time since the October conference, this is 1990, the Quorum of the 12 had been following the admonition against the obvious hastening that is taking place, the unprecedented, miraculous changing of the circumstances across the world. This hastening has been the source of sobering reflection, and we, the 12, under the direction of President Hunter, have held many meetings overviewing and calling into attention things of the past, looking at our circumstances at the present, and then note this line, and looking into the future, as is not only our calling, but our responsibility as prophet, seers, and revelators. So Elder Packard, I would say, confirms that they are seers and look into the future, and then can be a great aid to us. Okay, coming down here, Ammon says that seer is greater than a prophet. Seer is also a revelator and a prophet. That's a good note because, as mentioned here, note, a prophet is a teacher of known truth, where a seer is a perceiver of hidden truth, while a revelator is a bearer of that truth. So he differentiates them. Do you see that? Prophet is to be a teacher of the truths that are known. A revelator bears new truth. He reveals insights to new things. But a seer perceives of hidden truths. In the widest sense, the one most commonly used, the title prophet, includes the other titles and makes of the prophet a teacher, perceiver, and bearer of truth. That would be a great statement to have, and Elder John A. Widsoe would know, being a prophet, seer, and revelator. So there's some great insight for you. Notice then a seer, verse 17, can know of things that are past, also things that are to come, and things, and by them shall all things be revealed, or rather shall secret things. Look at this word, things here, things. It's interesting that the Hebrew word for thing is the word dabar. Okay? It's the root word for, you would say, this magical phrase of abracadabra. Dabar. Okay? Is the root word meaning a secret word that causes something to happen. Ooh, that's fascinating that they can know of secret things or words that are hidden and that can then cause other things to happen, knowing those secret things. Well, a couple of good quotes for you. Note, through what has been revealed by means of the Book of Mormon, The Revelations in the Doctrine and Covenants, the Prophet's translation of the King James Bible, and the Book of Abraham, and other inspired prophetic commentary, we sit, as it were, with a great Urim and Thummim before us, gazing upon the scenes of the days gone by. Then note, it just may be that the Lord revealed to Joseph Smith as much or more pertaining to the past than he did in regard to the future. Oh, great insight by Robert Millett. Elder Witzel, a seer is one who sees with spiritual eyes. He perceives the meaning of that which seems obscure to others. Therefore, he is an interpreter, a clarifier of eternal truth. He foresees the future from the past and the present. This he does by the power of the Lord operating through him directly or indirectly with the aid of divine instruments such as the Urim and Thummim. In short, he is one who sees, who walks in the Lord's light with open eyes. And because of that, look at this. These two next lines are then fascinating. Verse 18, thus, conclusion, God has provided a means that man, through faith, might work mighty miracles. Therefore, a seer becometh a great benefit to his fellow beings. Oh, what a great line. I hope you darken that, okay? Seers can become a great benefit to his fellow beings. Why? Look right here in verse 30. Because how blind and impenetrable are the understandings of the children of men. We don't see. We're many times caught in the world, many times, and need somebody who sees for us so that we can be benefited, which they do, and are a great help then to us as fellow beings. So hope you 18 and 20 are just awesome, considering that we have 15 prophets, seers, and revelators on the earth today. Okay, moving over in our scriptures, we now do something. We actually are going to get a review of what has happened from this little group that's been in bondage from their beginning to the end. So we're going to catch you up by reviewing what has happened from beginning to end, starting with Zeniff. So here is the record of Zeniff. You may want to be sure that you put as the main theme here, it is bondage. And that word appears, as I mentioned, 15 times in this record. So, main theme, here's a great quote for you. The bondage of Limhi's people results from their fathers rejecting the words of Abinadi and putting him to death, as I mentioned. How appropriate that Ammon, who would act as their liberator, first taught and testified to them of the same truths that were rejected when taught by Abinadi. The teachings of Mosiah do the same thing. Having seen the fulfillment of Abinadi's prophecy and come into bondage, Limhi's people were not sufficiently humble to accept those truths. Truths which would free them from the spiritual bondage that is always associated with rejecting the Lord's servants, and enable them to free themselves from the temporal bondage the Lamanites had imposed upon them. Note, one of the main reasons to include Limhi's story in the Book of Mormon is for the lesson that it teaches you and I about bondage, the steps leading to it, its different types, what we must do to be delivered from it, and the different degrees of help that the Lord gives us in dealing with it. So let me give you this review and help you remember that it is against the will of God that one of us should ever be in bondage in any way, neither to sin, nor to addiction, nor to debt. That coming from an apostle of the Lord. So here are the 4 kinds of bondage and the answer provided in the scriptures on how to overcome these. Here's a great note. I would be sure that you get into your scriptures or into notes someplace. In Mosiah 7:20 through 22, we see the bondage of finances. Why did it occur? Is because of overzealousness to inherit the land of his fathers. Therefore, he was deceived by cunning and craftiness of men. The answer provided is be careful in your financial overzealousness. Note, Zeno's overzealousness led him to make an unwise agreement with one whose ultimate purpose was to bring these Nephites into bondage. While we question the wisdom of Zeno, we would ask if the same kind of zeal causes people today to make agreements or sign contracts that will ultimately place them in political or financial bondage. Individuals can be overzealous for material possessions, or they can become so involved in a cause or in their work that they begin to neglect the weightier matters that are most important, such as family, church, and service to others. So, good quote there. Note, spiritual bondage. It's talked about in verses 24 and 25 of this chapter, of Mosiah 7, and all because of iniquity. They fell into transgression and contention, and that's what brought them to be in bondage. The answer then, obviously, for spiritual bondage is keep the commandments. Learn to be obedient to God, for all blessings come in this way. Section 130, verses 20 and 21. Physical bondage, talked about because they had killed a prophet of the Lord, then the answer is, instead of killing or mocking prophets of the Lord, that we must heed them. We must listen and follow the warnings of prophets, as we just talked about, who can be a great benefit to the children of men. Last of all is intellectual bondage. It's talked about in 12, verses 25 through 34. When you pretend to teach this people and to understand the spirit of prophecy, and yet you don't apply your hearts to that same understanding, if you, as Abinadi will mention, if you teach the law of Moses, then why don't you keep it? So if you teach people something, you must too live that same law. You're not above that law. So the answer is, don't stop seeking for things of God, and if you do, then the theories of men will take over. So there's the 4 kinds of bondage, being financial, spiritual, physical, or intellectual, and why this people fell into those bondages and what can get you out of those. So that's a quick review here in Mosiah chapter 9. And if we peek over to Mosiah 10 to finish today's lesson, and you come down to verse 12, we see that the Lamanites have incorporated a much different problem into their society. Notice they were a wild, ferocious, and bloodthirsty people, believing in the tradition of their fathers. Now, be sure you darken that phrase, believing that they had been driven out of the land of Jerusalem because of the iniquity of their fathers, that they were wronged in the wilderness by Nephi and the brethren, that they were wronged while crossing the sea. See, they've been lied to by their elders. And so here are 6 false traditions of the fathers or the Lamanites. They are all right here in verses 12 through 16. They were driven out of the land of Jerusalem. They were wronged in the wilderness. They were wronged while crossing the sea. They were wronged, if you go down to 13, wronged in the land of their first inheritance. They were wroth because the ruling of their people had been taken out of their hands. Nephi got to be ruler and not Laman, okay, because of wickedness and the loss of the birthright. And last of all, they were robbed of the engravings upon the plates of brass. They stole the plates of brass from us. Note how those traditions had been passed down to children and grandchildren, so that this people literally are set in an eternal hatred towards the Nephites. Here's a couple of great quotes concerning maybe some of those false traditions that might carry on into our own lives by general authorities. The scriptures illustrate how conviction and faith can overcome traditions in conflict with God's plan, bringing blessings to individuals and even generations of people. I encourage you who have already made correct cultural choices to help others do likewise. Is yours a culture where the husband exerts a domineering, authoritarian role, making all of the important decisions for the family? That pattern needs to be tempered so that both husband and wife act as equal partners, making decisions in unity for themselves and for their family. No family can long endure under fear and force. That leads to contention and rebellion. Love is the foundation of a happy family. There are other false traditions that should be set aside in aspects of heritage. Do they violate the word of wisdom? That is based on forcing others to comply by the power of station, often determined by heredity. That encourages the establishment of a caste system that breeds conflict with other cultures. There is a serious danger in placing culture, heritage, and priority above membership of the Church of Jesus Christ. That zeal to defend one's own culture may lead to excesses that are known to be wrong. Should you choose even unknowingly to follow traditions which is in conflict with the teachings of the Lord, you choose to violate the sacred covenants made at baptism. That decision is much more serious than temple covenants have been made. Such actions would move you from the plan of happiness, peace, and eternal joy defined by your Creator to something of far less worth and infinitely less capacity to bless your life. If in an awkward attempt to express a truth, I have stirred feelings of offense, Elder Scott says, I apologize. Please overlook my inadequacy and try to understand the truth of what is being said. I testify that you will remove barriers to happiness and find greater peace as you make your first allegiance your membership in the Church of Jesus Christ and His teachings and the foundation of your life. Where family or national traditions or customs conflict with the teachings of God, set them aside where traditions and customs are in harmony with His teachings, and they should be cherished and followed to preserve your culture and heritage. Elder Oaks stated, the teachings of Jesus also challenge the traditions of different groups. The traditions of culture or ways of life of a people inevitably include some practices that may be changed by those who wish to qualify for God's choicest blessings. Chastity is an example. Weekly attendance at church is another example of a commandment contrary to popular tradition. The Lord's command that we abstain from alcohol, tobacco, tea, and coffee also runs counter to the traditions of many. Another example is honesty. A less serious, worldly tradition that conflicts with gospel culture is the idea of upward or downward movement in position. So both these good prophets, seers, and revelators have said, be sure that the traditions that have been established in your family and your culture, if they are good, then maintain and preserve them. But if there are false traditions, then be careful, because they may trickle down into generations who will live with these false traditions because you allowed them to continue in your family and culture. So good insights there. Notice that because of these false traditions, notice his brethren were wroth with him because they understood not the dealings of the Lord. Now, that's interesting, because they hardened their hearts against the Lord. Neil A. Maxwell stated, to misread something so crucial constitutes a failure to know God, who then ends up being wrongly seen as an unreachable, uninvolved, uncaring, unable, and a disabled and diminishing deity, really about whose seems limitations, ironically, some then quickly complain. By believing in such a disabled God, people can be pretty much as they please. They can do pretty much as they please. It is then not many steps further to say there is no God, therefore no law and no sin, which you can see has, which is then incorporated into the Lamanite people at this time. So for this cause, King Laman had cunning and craftily deceived Zeniff and had brought his whole people into bondage. We will see next week how a prophet of God gave them the opportunity to escape this bondage by putting in place commandments and repentance and obeying those things of the Lord. My favorite lesson of the Book of Mormon next week is Benadiah in Mosiah 11 through 17. So I hope that you join me for that. Grateful for the scriptures. That's all I have for you for today's lesson. Hope that you'll take a closer look at these marvelous 4 chapters and find maybe some of the insights and some of the power that can be applied to your own personal life. I'm always grateful for your attendance and watching these, and your loving kindness to me and my family. Hope you'll again join me next week. Till then.